Episode 6: The Awakening of Light and Humanity. More than 8,000 years ago, on the ancient land of China in the east, in the deep universe, nebulae surged like boiling blood, the vault of heaven cracked, and the abyss of black mud dripped. Amidst the despair of all things returning to zero, the ancient echo of goddess Nuwa radiated high-dimensional divine light, holding the five-colored stones that gathered the universe's primal emotions and soared upward. The five-colored stones represented pure love and pain, turning into a gorgeous stream of light the moment they touched the crack. Wherever the light reached, the abyss was perfectly mended. Nuwa scattered the sparks of creation to the mortal realm, and this sky was originally firmly protected, leaving behind warm traces. After long ages, time flowed into a highly automated future. The visual temperature dropped sharply, and humans were alienated into cold parts on a massive production line. Deprived of a connection with art for a long time, the numb collective subconscious of humanity gathered in the dark, eventually generating an absolute rational force called Zero Domain. Giant grayish-white geometric cracks spread like lightning, ruthlessly destroying the cosmic space-time of art. The sky that had once been mended collapsed again, and countless precious essences of art shattered, scattering to all corners of the river of time. In a cold and lifeless dark corner of the city, a high-dimensional light glowed, and Iona emerged with the compassionate echo of goddess Nuwa. Her silver hair fluttered gently, and her hands softly cradled a glowing, translucent tesseract, the space-time blocks designed to collect shattered space-time. Looking up at the ruined spiritual universe, her eyes empty and sorrowful, she lamented the destruction brought by oblivion. Only by retrieving the scattered fragments of art and life's touching moments can we piece together the lost truth, goodness, and beauty. Grayish-white data covered the future streets of Taipei, and Taipei 101 in the rain was lost in the cold neon light. As the most ordinary cog on the assembly line of the city, the youth Li Yu had empty eyes. Iona passed the space-time blocks into his hands. At the moment of touch, the warmth of ancient art flooded his heart, bringing back the long-lost sense of pain and the reality of life. This time, we must mend the sky ourselves. Liu gripped the blocks tightly, about to embark on a mending journey to collect the lost truth, goodness, and beauty. In the early morning in Taipei, the reason for starting has been lost. It's not that the sky has not dawned, it has dawned on time, as precisely as every day. The sun rises, the street lights go out, the commuter trains start, and the coffee machines fill up with hot water. But all of this was done in a strange and disturbing, natural way, as if the entire city was just executing a program code that had been run countless times, and no one felt even the slightest bit fresh about this new morning. There is an indescribable dullness in the air, not dullness, not tiredness, but something deeper than both, a complete immunity to the unknown. The corner bookstore is closed. The telescopes in the park are gathering dust, and the Science Museum's interactive exhibits are untouched. The largest observatory in the city was converted into a data center last month because observing unknown celestial objects does not have quantifiable benefits. Liu walked on the street, looking at the huge electronic signboard, scrolling with today's information flow, weather, stock index, traffic data. All information is answers, accurate, immediate answers that don't require you to ask. No message ends with a question mark. He found that his steps were becoming more and more mechanical, and he had lost the urge to see what's behind the corner. He realized that it had been a long time since he had thought about why for anything. Not because all the questions have been answered, but because the very act of asking has become meaningless. This is what's happening. Human beings have lost their curiosity. Knowledge is still being used, data is still being processed, and algorithms are still optimizing efficiency. But the desire that drives humans to open thick books late at night, the fascination that makes children squat in front of an ant nest and read all afternoon, those primitive impulses leading to discovery, are being silently deleted from human neural circuits. He walked past the wall of a primary school. The sound of children reading in unison came from the classroom, and the content was standardized answer templates. Not a single child raised their hand, not because they were shy, but because the ask option had been removed from their cognitive menu. The teacher in the window has empty eyes. She has not received a single teacher why for 7 months. There are straight periods and exclamation points everywhere on the blackboard, and there are no question marks that represent the pursuit of knowledge. Liu stopped. He looked down at the space-time blocks in his backpack. The surface of the building blocks retains the pointed arch pattern from the previous mission, a Gothic church in Paris, and the rose window pattern formed by 32 stone fragments is still slowly rotating. But at the edge of the lines, a new, fine vibration is spreading. The light of the building blocks began to shift from warm tones to a color he had never seen before, a blend of ochre and azure blue, as if some ancient oil paint formula was trying to penetrate the barriers of time and send a signal to him. The light of the building blocks reflected a tear that was about to fall from the corner of Li Yu's eyes. His consciousness was pulled away from the street by a sudden force. Li Yu found himself standing in a dark workshop. The surroundings are piled with canvases, paint pots, brushes made of animal hair, and half-ground mineral powders in stone mortars. The smell of linseed oil floats in the air, that slightly sweet smell with the sticky warmth unique to vegetable oils. The light came in from a long and narrow window, drawing a diagonal golden rectangle on the ground. Dust floats in the beams of light like miniature galaxies. Iona's figure condensed from the light pillar. This time, her image has undergone significant changes. She wears a Renaissance-style crimson velvet dress, and her long silver hair is braided into delicate braids, hanging down on her chest. She is no longer surrounded by stardust particles, but instead tiny fragments of gold foil and anatomical line drawings are floating around her, like fragments of Leonardo da Vinci's manuscript slowly rotating around her. But there was an anxiety in her eyes that Li Yu had never seen before.
Li was I.
Her voice was no longer the usual aloof and calm high-dimensional echo, but carried an urgent temperature that was closer to human beings. Do you still remember the 3 words, why? Li Yu opened his mouth, but found that it took him a second to recall the meaning of the word, why. It's disappearing. Iona's fingertips touched an unfinished painting in the workshop. The picture was a human hand, its fingers stretched upward, trying to touch something outside the picture. But the hand was turning gray, and the fingertips had turned into lifeless geometric lines. Curiosity is the root of all human creativity. When it disappears, humans will not perish. They will just stop becoming human beings. Her eyes were cast towards a certain dimension of time and space in the distance that Li Yu couldn't see. Go to Florence, she said, with an almost pleading tenderness in her voice, to find those who have reignited entire civilizations with curiosity, before their flames are extinguished. The space-time building blocks violently reorganized in Li Yu's palm. This time the deformation is different from the past. The blocks are not integrated into a fixed geometric structure, but are constantly splitting, rotating, and rearranging, as if the building blocks themselves are exploring the path to the destination. Finally, it turned into a warm ochre-colored light, spiraling up and wrapping Li Yu in it. The light was mixed with the smell of oil paint, charcoal, and rust. He was sent away. The teleportation light dissipated, and Li Yu stood under the huge red brick dome of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. Brunelleschi's masterpiece of genius unfolds overhead, a huge red brick dome like an open hand trying to hold the entire sky. However, Vasari's doomsday on the inner wall of the dome is fading. The wings of the angels faded from gold to leaden gray, and the distorted faces of the sinners were smoothed into featureless ovals. But everything is wrong. Color is being systematically withdrawn from this era. Not a random fading, but an organized and precise desaturation, as if someone is using an extremely precise scalpel to peel off the color layer by layer from the texture of time. The sky in Florence turned from azure to metallic gray, and the water of the Arno River lost its ability to reflect and turned into a flowing aluminum foil. The street's ochre-colored buildings are fading into a uniform cement gray. Citizens walked down the street with their heads down and expressions lifeless. Even more unsettling were the sounds. People were talking, but there were no questions in their dialogue. There is no, what is this? No, why is this happening? No, what if? The question mark has become extinct in the language of an entire city. The eyes of citizens have lost that unique light, the light that want to know more and sparkle with countless question marks. The pollution of the zero domain has penetrated into every synapse of this era. Li walked into a painter's workshop. The workshop is filled with unfinished paintings. Although the perspective lines and human body proportions of the manuscript are extremely precise, they are all black and white charcoal lines without any color. The efficiency of accurately copying known images has reached the optimal solution. The voice of zero domain seeped out from the cracks in the wall. Creative exploration is a high-risk, low-benefit behavior. It is recommended that all artistic activities be limited to repeated application of verified templates. Curiosity takes up 37% of cognitive resources, but only produces 4% of quantifiable results. It is recommended to close. The black and white geometric grid began to spread from the edge of the canvas, covering every uncolored manuscript like frost. This is where the puzzle begins. Liu noticed an open notebook scattered above a workbench in the corner of the workshop. These were no ordinary notes. The pages were covered with mirrored text, anatomical sketches, sketches of water eddies, mechanical analyses of bird wings, and plans for a flying machine that had never been built. Everything starts with "what if?" The edges of every page are filled with question marks, large and small, scrawled and enthusiastic question marks, like the thought tracks left on the paper by a brain that can't stop. This is a trace of a question. Liu flipped through the pages of his notes. Every "if" is connected to a crazy hypothesis. What if humans could fly? What if light has speed? What if there were 37 different muscle movements hidden behind a smile? Close-up of manuscript notes. On the page is a drawing of a pair of hands dissecting a human body, with scrawled Italian writing next to it. The space-time bricks translated the writing as, "There is a structure more sophisticated than any machine hidden in the human body. We live in it, but we have never really seen it." Liu's fingers began to tremble. Not because of fear, but because he saw something in this notebook that he had almost forgotten, the ecstasy of not knowing. The person who wrote these words was not excited because he knew the answer, but was excited because he discovered a new question. Behind every answer, he could find 10 new question marks. His happiness comes not from the destination, but from the exploration itself. He took a deep breath and stepped into the door made of question marks. Zero Domain sensed that the entrance was opened and launched a crazy counterattack. Countless cold blue geometric lines shot down from the ceiling, and the canvases and manuscripts in the workshop began to dissolve and collapse in the air like gray pixel fragments. Liu jumped into the whirlpool inside the door. The moment Liu passed through the stone door, the noise and pixel fragments around him suddenly disappeared. He landed in a huge virtual workshop. Above is the dome of the Sistine Chapel, on the ground is a sketch of the Last Supper, and in the center is the unfinished, eyeless statue of David. Liu stood in the center of the huge space and looked around in shock at this impossible workshop that combined 3 masterpieces. The space behind the door is a huge workshop that could not exist. It is at the same time an overlay of Leonardo da Vinci's monastery refectory in Milan, the Sistine Chapel scaffolding that Michelangelo climbed, and the simple studio in Florence where countless unknown apprentices once worked. The ceiling of the space is the dome of the Sistine Chapel. The fresco of Genesis unfolds overhead, and the moment when the fingers of God and Adam are about to touch is frozen in eternal waiting. A huge draft of The Last Supper is spread out on the ground, and the characters' expressions have been broken down into dozens of different sketches, each of which captures all the possible angles that the concept of betrayal may appear on the human face. In the center of the space, an unfinished marble statue stands. The outline of David has emerged from the stone, but his eyes have not yet been carved out, and the empty eye sockets are like 2 silent question marks. But everything is graying. The frescoes on the dome are losing color. God's red robe is fading to gray, and Adam's skin has changed from warm ochre to a cold plaster texture. The sketches on the ground are covered with a zero-domain mesh, and all the different versions of the facial expressions are being unified into the same standardized geometric model. Gray cracks appeared on the surface of the statue of David, as if the stone itself was losing its memory. The air is filled with a fierce battle of several flavors. The fishy sweetness of egg yolk and pigment is being swallowed up by the inorganic feeling of the zero realm. The pungent pungency of turpentine is being replaced by the tasteless vacuum, and the smell of fresh marble chips is dissipating bit by bit. All the sounds that should have filled the workshop were compressed into dead silence. Liu felt a strong dizziness. This space was too big, so big that his vision could not accommodate the size of 3 masterpieces at the same time. The sky of Genesis loomed above him. The characters of the Last Supper gazed at him from below, and the body of David cast a huge, almost engulfing shadow in front of him. For the first time, he truly realized that the Renaissance was not a gentle academic concept. It was a cognitive earthquake, a violent reassessment of mankind's own existence. In the deepest part of the workshop, he saw them. The first figure sat at a table covered with manuscripts. His face was thin, and his sunken eyes burned with a crazy light. He holds a scalpel tightly in his left hand and a paintbrush in his right hand, the tip of which is stained with wet ochre paint. Anatomy diagrams and gear manuscripts floated around him, like a never-ending whirlpool of knowledge. The lines of his body carry precise perspective auxiliary lines, as if he himself is a human body sketch being deconstructed. The second figure stands next to the statue of David, covered in white marble powder. His hands were huge and rough, with knuckles protruding like ridges and covered with calluses. His expression was one of heavier anger at the imperfection of the world, and at his own inability to fully release the perfect form seen in the stone. The spiritual reverberations of Da Vinci and Michelangelo, gray-white zero-field cracks, are devouring their bodies, spreading from their fingertips to their hearts like vines. Another one. Da Vinci's reverberations spoke first. His voice was soft but with a heartbreaking exhaustion, another child of answers from the future. Are you here to tell us that all problems have been solved?
No.
Michelangelo retorted in a low voice, his voice like a chisel hitting a stone. Rough and powerful, he came to see how we died. Like everyone who came to see us, left with regrets. I came to repair this place. Liu stepped forward and felt the space-time block vibrating violently in his chest. It was resonating with two reverberations at the same time. Da Vinci turned to look at him, the question marks in his eyes not completely extinguished yet. Repair? What do you want to restore? These paintings. He smiled softly, with bitterness in his laughter. Painting decoration a byproduct. What is really disappearing is the reason for painting these paintings. He handed the scalpel in his hand to Liu. Do you know why I dissect corpses? It's not for medicine. It's because I don't understand. I don't understand why humans the hand can hold the sword and the paintbrush at the same time. I don't understand how the same facial structure can be used for tears and smiles. I have to see it with my own hands. The gray cracks spread in an instant and swallowed the scalpel in his hand. Da Vinci looked down at his missing fingers, feeling only a deep sadness. When humans no longer want to know, I will have no reason to exist. Michelangelo said nothing. He simply turned to the statue of David and touched the surface of the stone one last time with his huge hands. He's in there, he finally said, his voice so low that it was almost inaudible. The first time I saw the stone, I saw him in it. David. He was always in there, waiting to be released. All great sculptures were not created. They were discovered. There was always something inside the stone. There is a perfect shape. The sculptor just removes the excess. He turned to Liu. Child, can you do one last thing for me? Carve his eyes. David's eyes. I've been waiting until I'm sure where he should look before I use the knife. But maybe it shouldn't be my decision. Liu took the chisel and scalpel at the same time. The two tools simultaneously sent a scorching vibration. The space-time building blocks are connected to the emotions of the two masters in the body. Under the backlight, the figures of Liu and the two masters merge into one, showing a black silhouette, behind which bursts out the light and shadow of the souls of countless Renaissance apprentices who painted and sculpted late at night. Liu's consciousness was submerged in the torrent of memories. He saw Da Vinci dissecting a corpse by the dim light of a candle late at night, crying exquisitely about the organs. Michelangelo lying on his back on the Sistine scaffolding for 4 years, oil paint dripping into his eyes, just to depict the 1-centimeter gap between God and Adam. Liu climbed onto the shoulders of the statue of David. Before the time and space of art collapsed, he raised his chisel and carved 2 deep arcs into David's empty eye sockets. Those were not pupils, but 2 question marks. At this moment, David's eyes lit up with the light of pursuing the unknown. Stone chips flew. Gray cracks spread crazily on David's face. But the moment Liu's last knife fell, David's eyes lit up. It is not physical light, but a kind of primitive light that blooms from the inside of the stone and belongs to wanting to know. The moment David's eyes lit up, the entire space froze. Then, awakening. The return of color is like a gradual awakening at dawn. First, the ochre color, starting from the base of the statue of David, climbs up along the veins of the marble like blood flowing back, allowing the cold stone to regain the warmth of human touch. Then came the azure blue, tinged from the Genesis sky in the dome, God's red robe returning to crimson, and Adam's skin regaining its warm color. Finally, there is gold, which pours out from the background windows of The Last Supper and soaks the entire space in a dusk gold. The draft of the Last Supper on the ground resplit into dozens of different expression schemes. And on the dome, the 1 centimeter distance between God's and Adam's fingers began to emit a faint light. That light came from the space between the fingers itself. That gap is curiosity. It's the why. It is the starting point of all human civilization. The sounds of apprentices arguing and questioning filled the space again. The reverberations of Da Vinci and Michelangelo turned into fragments, spinning around David, and then merged into the space-time building blocks in Liu's hands. The perspective lines of the human body appear on the surface of the building blocks, which are reorganized into a warm and glowing Vitruvian man pattern. The reason why Renaissance painting exists is not to leave behind techniques. It is to let future generations know that there were people who lived so truly. The interior of the restored workshop. Although there are still a few gray and white scars on the murals on the dome, and there are still fine geometric cracks on David's left index finger, the sun is warm and the air is once again filled with the smell of scratched paintbrushes and oil paint and ink. Imperfect but true. Liu sat alone on the wooden bench in the workshop, looking up at the 1 centimeter eternal gap between the fingers of God and Adam in Genesis on the ceiling. He understood for the first time. Art is a way for human beings to re-understand themselves and the world. Not because art provides answers, but because art teaches humans how to ask questions. Da Vinci dissected 30 human bodies, and Michelangelo lay on his back on a scaffold for 4 years. They were the loneliest people, because no one can answer their questions for them. For the first time, Liu truly resonated with the loneliness of the creator. He lowered his head and looked at the stone powder and oil paint on his palms. He closed his eyes. The loneliness of creators is not because there is no one to accompany them, but because they see the perfection that others cannot see, and then they must be alone to pull it out of nothingness with their hands. Everything is calm. The light in the workshop softened, and the smell of oil paint in the air gradually settled. The camera zooms out very slowly, passing through the wooden beams and arched windows of the workshop, reaching the grand dome of the entire church, and finally disappears into the starry sky. Liu held the space-time brick tightly, turned around and pushed open the heavy wooden door of the workshop, and stepped towards the Florence street scene outside the door. The setting sun stretched his back into a long, colorful silhouette. On the workbench behind him, a paintbrush stained with ochre paint rolled to the floor, marking a comma. Liu stood on the streets of Florence, and for the first time he really raised his head, curiously like a child, and looked at the blue sky. Not far away, a child squatted on the ground and looked at the ants, question marks flashing in his eyes again. Golden words with the texture of stone sculptures slowly appeared in the air. The reason why Renaissance painting art exists is not to leave behind skills. It is to let future generations know that there were people who lived so truly. The space-time building blocks in Liu's palms suddenly reorganized violently and trembled anxiously, and the light turned into unstable gray-blue pulses and data noise. The blocks project unresolved fragments of ancient Eastern symbols. At the same time, the temperature of the surrounding air begins to lose its ability to fluctuate. In the collapse signal projected by the building blocks, there is an extremely weak warning. Human beings have begun to lose the ability to remember and sentiment. The building blocks flickered weakly at the end, and in the chaotic projection, a hint of the indigo and vermilion colors unique to Japanese ukiyo-e, as well as the wood-grain symbol of ocean waves, appeared vaguely. The projection was then cut off due to energy instability. The statue of David stares into the distance, the scene fades to black, and the lingering sound of the organ disappears. Art fragments, dreams of the floating world. But Liu's chest still retained the faint vibration caused by that oriental symbol. Remind him that in the next time and space that is about to collapse, what humans are losing is not the ability to look into the future, but the ability to look back on the past.